So far we have been talking about various characterizing tools. We started with structural characterization. You remember, we talked about XRD. We talked about TEM as a diffraction tool, what we call it as electron diffraction. Of course, we did not go to the other diffractions such as neutron diffraction, which is a little more involved. So we left it that part of it. So we looked at structural characterization. Then we went to microstructural characterization. And we started with an optical microscope. We went into a CM. We went into a TEM. And we also went into a field ion microscope. And finally an atom probe tomography. So we looked at various levels of microstructural information, where as you go down you would have seen that the resolution keeps on increasing. So we have a low resolution of the order of around 200 nanometers or so here, and where here you may be ending up with let's say about 20 nanometer with a normal SEM, and maybe FEG SEM you may be ending up with about 5 nanometers or so. And TEM, where the best TEM now, a normal conventional TEM will have about 1 nanometer resolution, and the best what is called aberration corrected TEM has about 0.5 angstrom is what it is claimed. So you can see the resolutions keep increasing, and we talked about all this, and we said that all these things particularly talk about 2D information. And so we talked about what is called an atom probe tomography, where you can get a 3D information of atomic arrangement. So where you can get a atomic resolution and get an information about how the atoms are distributed in a material. So this is more like a spectroscopic technique, but gives you a microstructural information where elemental distribution in a microscopic level, and we are able to see information such as how the elements are distributed at the grain boundaries, or within the grains, or within certain clusters of inside the material, or at the very early stages of precipitation, for example. All this can be found out using this kind of a tool. Then we went into spectroscopic techniques, where our interest was to find out the composition of an alloy, but we confined ourselves to microprobe analysis techniques, where we probe a small domain. Of course, I forgot to mention that we also talked about other microstructural information, particularly of the surface topography, using techniques such as AFM and STM. We also talked about this. Scanning tunneling microscope and atomic force microscope, magnetic force microscope, things like this also we have talked about, where you get still atomic resolution without going through this problem, this resolution limited by lambda. So here you actually are not using the lambda, a smaller lambda, to be able to see the atomic resolution, but using the forces between a particular probe and the surface of a sample, and from that you are able to get information. So these are all various microstructural tools, whether they are on the surface or interior of the surface. Both of them can be covered by these techniques. Now in the spectroscopic techniques, we talked about EDS, WDS, energy dispersive spectroscopy, wavelength dispersive spectroscopy. We also talked about EPMA. We also talked about, for example, techniques such as XPS and techniques such as XRF. Though we dealt with them in very brief, just to know the principles of it, but we have dealt with all these techniques where we try to understand the principles of how the information from the sample can be obtained by using variety of tools, in which always you are using X-rays as a source. In all these cases, X-rays are used as a source, And in addition, we also talked about two other techniques, which is atomic absorption spectroscopy and atomic emission spectroscopy, where we don't use X-rays as a source, but either absorption that is taking from every individual atom, or the absorption that or the energy that is required to emit atoms from a sample. All these principles are used to be able to understand this. So these are all the three basic characterization tools that we have understood so far: the structure, the microstructure, and the composition. Now let's find out how to analyze the sample a little more using thermal energy. And to get some more information about the sample by looking at certain inherent information of a sample which is related to the thermal vibrations inside the sample. For example, all of us are aware of heat capacity, Cp, which is a characteristic of a material, and at a given temperature every material has certain heat capacity which is related to how the atoms vibrate. And we know that heat capacity is usually given as a function of A plus Bt plus Ct square and things like that, Ct to the power minus 2 and things like that. So this gives you an idea of how the heat capacity of every material changes as a function of temperature, and these constants A, B, C are different for different materials, but in principle one can find out these values. And this heat capacity is reflected in terms of the enthalpy inside the material, which is usually taken as integral Cp dt from some T1 to T2. So in principle, so we can actually measure the enthalpy inside the material if you know what is the heat capacity of the material. Or vice versa, if you can find out the enthalpy change in the material when you go from one temperature to other temperature, from that you can find out the heat capacity of the material, and these two can be exclusively used to find out the what is called thermal response of a material. And this can be useful particularly when we have various phase transformations taking place inside a material, and we can use this particular information of enthalpy changes to be able to identify where a particular phase transformation is happening. For example, if you want to look at where a solid is becoming a liquid, which is called melting point, we know that this melting point is a phenomena where there is always a certain enthalpy exchange involved. So the enthalpy of the solid and the enthalpy of the liquid are always different. Why they are different? If I use this particular formula, H of solid is related to Cp of the solid, and H of liquid is related to integral Cp dt, where Cp here is Cp of the liquid. So because we know that heat capacity of the liquid is different from the heat capacity of solid, and heat capacity of the liquid is higher than the heat capacity of the solid, because the liquid being more open in structure, so atomic vibrations in the liquid are much more than the atomic vibrations in the solid. As a result, the heat capacity of liquid is always higher than the heat capacity of the solid, and that brings down to a fact that if I plot the enthalpy as a function of temperature, you will see that the enthalpy as a function of temperature shows a plot something like this, where this particular temperature is a melting point, and this is a liquid and this is a solid. Of course, this is not really a straight line. One has to remember that, because this Cp is not a constant here. Cp is varying as a function of temperature. So this has certain slope, and the slope changes with temperature. As long as I understand, I can say that at the melting point, when a liquid is changing into a solid, there is a certain enthalpy of the liquid at the melting point, and there is a certain enthalpy of the solid at the melting point, and this difference is what we call it as delta H fusion. And this is something which we can measure it as a function of temperature, and from that be able to find out that there is a melting point. And this is usually the case when you have a first order transition. This is another point that one need to understand, that not all transformations will have a certain delta H associated with it. Okay, if you look at the typical free energy associated with any phase transformation, if I say generally write this expression dg equal to one of the Maxwell's expression VdP minus SdT, you can always write from this Maxwell's equation that from this particular expression that at transformation temperature dt by dP is equal to delta V by delta S. This is something that we all know. This is what is called Clausius-Clapeyron equation. So this is a standard equation that we all know, and this particular thing, if you look at it, for different type of transformations, you will see a different types of variation. For example, there are certain transformations which are called first order transformations, where the free energy is at the transformation temperature delta G is 0, but the first differential of free energy with respect to the temperature or pressure for that matter, the first differential dou G by dou P and dou G by dou T, these two are discontinuous at transformation temperature. This is the characteristic of a first order transformation. The actual the free energy itself is continuous. For example, if I draw G versus temperature for this transformation, let us say where a solid is becoming a liquid or a liquid is becoming a solid, depending on whichever direction I see, I usually see a plot something like this, where this is the G of the solid, this is the G of the liquid, and such a way that at the transformation temperature the delta G is 0. So if you carefully observe, the G at the transformation temperature is continuous, because if I simply look at how the G is changing, you will see that below the transformation temperature it is solid that is stable, and if I look at its free energy, the free energy of the solid is this, and above the transformation temperature it is the liquid that is stable, and the free energy of the liquid is this that we are talking about, because we always know that according to the definition, the phase with the lower free energy is the stable state when compared to a phase with a higher free energy at any given temperature. So in this particular case, at temperatures below the melting point, it is the solid that is more stable because it has a lower free energy. At the temperatures above the melting point, it is liquid that is stable because it has a lower free energy than the solid. And once I know that, if I only look at how this free energy is changing, you see there is a continuous change in the free energy. But if I look at the slope of this free energy versus temperature, the slope of this free energy at the transformation temperature, there is a change in the slope. And so that slope is discontinuous is what we are saying. And what is that particular slope? If you look at it, dou G by dou T, if you look at it, for example here, for example, if you look at this particular equation, Maxwell's equation, and dou G by dou T at constant pressure is dou G by dou T at constant pressure. If constant pressure this goes off, then constant pressure this is equal to minus S. So at constant pressure, the differential of free energy versus temperature is S. So because the differential is S, the first order transformations are those where S is discontinuous at transformation temperature. And because S is related to H, because our definition of entropy from the second law of thermodynamics is such that ds is dH by T. Because ds is dH by T, if S is discontinuous, then H is also discontinuous. So as a result, you will see this kind of relation. So if I plot H versus temperature, or if I plot S versus temperature, you will see there is a discontinuity at the transformation temperature, which is the melting point. So here this is the S of the liquid, here this is the S of the solid, and at the transformation temperature there is a delta S associated with this, and this is what we call it as delta S fusion. And this delta S fusion and delta H fusion are connected with each other in such a way that delta S fusion is equal to delta H fusion divided by the melting point. So you can see that if I plot S versus T or H versus T, I will always see a discontinuity in the S or H at the transformation temperature. Whereas if I look at only G, G is continuous at the transformation temperature. There is no discontinuity. This is a typical first order transformation. So first order transformations are all those where the enthalpy, suddenly you see a change in the enthalpy at the transformation temperature, and we can happily use this property change in order to identify at what temperature this phase is transforming to another, and also what is the enthalpy associated with it, by simply using techniques such as a calorimetry, and that is what we call it as the thermal analysis. Of course, I can also talk about the second order transition. For the sake of completion, I will talk about it. The second order transition is that where the second differential of free energy is discontinuous. What is the second differential? The first differential we have already seen, that dou G by dou T, we have written some time back, here it is, dou G by dou T is minus S. So the second differential, dou square G by dou T square, will be nothing but ds by dt. And we have already seen somewhere, S is nothing but integral Cp dt by T, T1 to T2. Why is it so? Because ds is dh by T, and H we have already seen, H is nothing but integral Cp dt by Cp dt, T1 to T2. If H is integral Cp dt, then S is nothing but Cp dt by T, because the T comes here. So as a result, in principle, if I look at the second differential of free energy, second differential of PNG turns out to be nothing but Cp. So if I plot Cp versus temperature, and you will see for a second order transformation, the G and the first differential, which is S R H, I would call it as S R H, both of them will be continuous, whereas the second differential, which is Cp, this will be discontinuous. So if I plot Cp versus temperature, suddenly you will see a Cp changing at the transformation temperature, and that is the characteristic of a second order transformation. Whereas if I simply plot the H versus T, I will see that H versus T will show a similar plot such as this, that H will continuously change at the transformation temperature. Such transformations, for an example, they are, for example, a glass transition is such a transformation. Glass transition is a transition where delta H and delta S, both of them are 0. So delta G is also 0. That means when a liquid is becoming a glass, when a liquid is becoming a glass, delta H is 0, delta S is 0, and you will also see that the delta G, of course, because no transformation is possible without this delta G being 0. So then the only difference in this particular case, what is the difference between liquid and glass? You will see it is the Cp. So at the glass transition temperature, this transition happens at Tg, what is called glass transition temperature. And at the glass transition temperature, you will see that the Cp is discontinuous. And people and this is only one of the type of transformation. The other type of transformation is order disorder transitions. There are quite a number of order disorder transitions where they are second order transitions where the Cp at the transformation temperature is discontinuous, whereas rest of the things are all continuous. So this is a second order transformation, and people generally observe this. And we simply, for example, if I take, how do I recognize this, that the delta H is 0. For example, if I take a glass and heat a glass, take a glass and heat it as a function of temperature, you will see that at the temperature where the glass is transforming back to the liquid, which is nothing but the Tg, at that temperature you will see that there is neither heat evolved or not heat absorbed. So there will be no heat evolution or absorption. Delta H will be absolutely 0. And so that is one of the way to find out. Whereas if I take a liquid which is becoming a solid, which is a crystalline solid, not a glass, and you will see in this particular case definitely there is a delta H which is a fixed value which is associated with it. And in this particular case there is a heat evolved because liquid has a higher enthalpy than the solid, so heat is evolved. Whereas if it is the reverse, the solid will take heat and then get converted into liquid. So this is one thing that we regularly use in order to measure, and that gives you a lot of information about how various transformations are taking place by simply using heat as a mode of understanding the behavior of materials. So that is what we call it as thermal analysis. So let us look at what this thermal analysis means. So we are using heat as a source to understand phase transformations, materials behavior. Not only phase transformations, we can also capture information about the heat capacity of a material to know how the heat capacity is changing as a function of temperature for a given material, compare different materials and talk in terms of the heat capacity of each of these materials. So we will try to look at that aspect right now. In this connection, in fact, I should say that all phase diagrams are all generally obtained using this particular thermal analysis. For example, if you have a typical isomorphous phase diagram, let's say copper nickel, and if I take an alloy and allow it to solidify, you will see that it has some liquidous temperature, it has a solidus temperature. Whereas if I take a pure metal, it has only one temperature which we call it as a melting point. Whether it is pure A or pure B, it has a fixed temperature. Now what generally people do to find out such a phase diagram, particularly this is done in most of the simple phase diagrams where there are not many complications in the phase diagram, is by using what is this called thermal analysis, or people also use this term called cooling curve method, where they simply take the alloy, melt this alloy. For example, if I take a pure metal such as copper, melt this copper and put a thermocouple inside it and switch off the furnace, allow this liquid to cool, and as it cools I try to measure how the temperature of this liquid is changing as a function of time and plot this temperature change as a function of time. You usually see the change usually happens this way, and this is a typical cooling curve during solidification, where this is liquid, this is solid, and this is where liquid is changing to solid. Of course, one has to be careful to understand that these two lines are not really straight lines, because we know that any single phase cools by a Newton's law of cooling. So the cooling rate is actually proportional to 2 to the power 4. So actually it is not actually straight line. So that information let us understand. But now what is this horizontal? Why is it horizontal is a very important question. It is horizontal because a liquid transforms to a solid at a fixed temperature for a pure metal. Why is it so? It again comes from our phase rule. That is where phase rule becomes very useful. If I use a typical condensed phase rule where P plus F equal to C plus 1, and you will see for a pure metal the number of components are 1 and the number of phases are 2 because it is liquid becoming a solid. And if I find out F equal to 2 plus F equal to 1 plus 1, F equal to 0, which indicates that the alloy should solidify at a fixed temperature because there are no degrees of freedom. And for this particular transformation. So because there are no degrees of freedom for this transformation, liquid has to solidify at a fixed temperature. And this particular time is what we call it as solidification time. And this solidification time obviously would depend on what is called the delta H of fusion, how much heat is to be released when a liquid is transforming into solid, what is the amount of excess heat that is available in the liquid with respect to the solid, which has to be removed for the liquid to be converted into solid, is one parameter. The second that is very important is what is the rate at which this heat is being removed. So if I have a liquid inside a container, this container is basically being cooled at a certain rate. So this particular material has certain thermal conductivity and it has certain heat extraction rate, which I can call it as dH by dt. And if I put delta HF by dH by dt, what I get ultimately is a certain delta T. And that delta T is what we are looking at it. So there are two parameters which will influence. For example, if I have a smaller delta HF, you will see this will be smaller. If it is a larger delta HF for the same heat extraction rate, you will have a larger this one. Particularly, for example, when you have large freezing range alloys, you will have generally this will be larger. And if you have a mold which has a fast cooling rate or fast heat extraction rate, for the same amount of heat to be removed, you will see the solidification time will be smaller. So that's why if you are solidifying a metal in a sand mold or a metallic mold, the time of solidification is going to be different because rate of heat extraction is going to be different. But this is all for one particular type of solidification, which we call it as heterogeneous solidification involving heterogeneous nucleation. If a solidification involves homogeneous nucleation, which is not usually observed, because always there are certain heterogeneous sites that are available in most of the liquids, and as a result you will see the heterogeneous nucleation most common. Otherwise, if it is homogeneous nucleation, you will not see this kind of cooling curve, but you will see a slightly modified cooling curve, which is something like this. Again, if I plot temperature versus time, so where what happens is the liquid keeps on getting cooled even below the melting point, if this is the melting point, until a particular temperature, which usually represented by certain delta T under cooling, for the liquid to start transforming into a solid. The reason is when you want a solid to be nucleated inside the liquid, you need to create a new surface. This surface did not exist before, and to create this new surface, you have certain energy that is involved with that surface, which is called A gamma. Depending on what is the surface energy per unit area of this solid with respect to this liquid, and whatever is the surface area associated with it, this A gamma will represent the total energy that need to be spent for creating this solid. And this energy has to be spent only from the excess energy that is contained in the liquid. And at the melting point, as we can see from our, let's say, if I plot G versus T, you will see that at the transformation temperature, if I am taking a liquid, bringing it up to the melting point, this is a solid. The moment I bring it up to the melting point, at the melting point, the delta G is 0. So as a result, the liquid does not have any excess energy. The G of liquid is equal to G of solid. So liquid does not have any excess energy to create this surface, which needs this much energy to be spent. So if you don't have any money in your account, you cannot spend it. So similarly, if you want a solid to be nucleated, for which an energy has to be spent to create that surface, you need to have a liquid with an excess energy. So GL should be higher than GS, so that some delta G is available for it to be spent to create this surface. So when will you have that excess energy? Only when I bring the liquid below the melting point to a certain temperature T below the melting point, and at that temperature you see that liquid has a higher, GL is higher than the GS, and this difference is what we call it as delta G, is now available for creating this. So the liquid will keep on undercooling up to a particular temperature where this delta G, which we call it as delta GV, is equal to the A gamma. So V into delta GV, when it becomes equal to A into gamma, that gives me a limit of undercooling that I need to put, so that I have sufficient energy available for a particular volume of solid that is forming from a liquid, and this particular energy should be equal to that, and then you see suddenly at that particular temperature you have solid nucleating, and this is what we call it as delta Tn, the undercooling that is required for the nucleation to happen. And this undercooling that is required for the nucleation to happen, as you can easily see from this, is a function of gamma. So the larger the gamma for a particular system, the larger the undercooling that I need to provide to be able to achieve the homogeneous nucleation. And once the nucleation starts, in this whole cooling curve, the nucleation starts here. The nucleation does not start here. So the nucleation does not start here. The nucleation will start here, because the liquid has to be undercooled to a particular temperature where the delta T is sufficient enough to create a particular delta G, which is sufficient to create this particular surface. And once the solid is nucleated, then you will see that this particular solid that nucleates will lead to what is called a recalescence. What is this recalescence? If I see my previous plot that I have done, which is enthalpy versus temperature, you can see the moment a liquid transforms to a solid, certain enthalpy is released. There is a certain enthalpy released because liquid has an excess enthalpy than the solid. So when a liquid is getting converted to a solid, this particular volume, which is now converted into a solid, cannot contain all the enthalpy that is there in the liquid. So the solid can contain only a little bit of that particular enthalpy. So the balance of the enthalpy is thrown out. Where is it thrown out? It is thrown out into the liquid. So as a result, what happens is the surrounding liquid gets heated up, and as a result you can see this particular thing happens. So this is what we call it as recalescence, where the temperature rises and finally it reaches this constant temperature. Why does it reach a constant temperature? Ultimately because this has to be satisfied. Phase rules tells that the pure metal has to solidify at a fixed temperature, and that fixed temperature is the melting point. So this gets heated up to the original melting point of the material, and further new growth. It is only growth now. There is no more nucleation. Nucleation is already finished. So the growth occurs at a fixed temperature. So this is how we can talk about both heterogeneous and homogeneous nucleation, where we use this thermal analysis to understand this kind of solidification and get to know what is this temperature. So simply, if I can take a liquid and put a thermocouple, switch off the furnace after the metal is heated above the melting point, and then start cooling it, you will get either this kind of a curve, or as I told you before, a curve where you have simply something like this without this portion. And one of these two will give you an information of what is the melting point. And if I repeat this for various alloys, from one end to the other end, let's say if I make a number of alloys with every at regular intervals, let's say 10% nickel, 20% nickel, 30% nickel, and so on and so forth, starting from 0% nickel to 100% nickel. When I look at 0% nickel alloy and 100% nickel alloy, which I cannot call it as an alloy basically because they are two pure metal, both of them will give me a cooling curve like this. Will be simply just a liquid being cooled up to the melting point, and if it is a heterogeneous nucleation, which is normally the case, you will simply see a thermal arrest here, and then after the solidification is over, again the solid gets cooled by the Newton's law of cooling. So this is how you will be able to see. But what is the difference between copper and nickel? You will see the temperature at which this is happening is going to be different. So copper, it happens at 1083, which is the melting point of copper, whereas this happens at 1450, which is the melting point of nickel. So you will see that for both these things, if I do two cooling curves, one showing something like this, And if I superimpose the same on this temperature versus time, for the nickel, if this is for copper, I will get for the nickel something like this. This is, let's say, 1083, and this is, let's say, 1450. So I'll get two cooling curves, one for the copper, one for the nickel. Now if I do it for these alloys, you will see that in these alloys, because of my phase rule says that P plus F equal to C plus 1, and in this case C is 2, because there are two components that are involved, and P is again 2, because this is a liquid which is giving me a solid. So liquid giving you a solid, so P is 2. So F becomes 1. Because F is 1, the degrees of freedom are 1, then you will see the solidification occurs over a range of temperature. Whereas here you can see solidification is occurring at a fixed temperature, whereas on all these alloys, solidification occurs over a range of temperature. And that is reflected in the cooling curve. If I plot the cooling curve, you will see that temperature versus time. Again, the same thing that I do, I take an alloy and take a piece of that alloy and then melt it and put a thermocouple inside it and switch off the furnace and measure how the temperature is changing as a function of time. And if I do this, what you do see is you see usually something like this. A curve where this is a liquid, this is a solid, and this is liquid going to solid. So you only see a change in the slope at this point, and this happens over a range of temperature. This is what we call it as liquidus. This is what we call it as solidus. Why this slope change happens is because the moment you have a liquid in which at a particular temperature the solid has nucleated at some places, the moment solid nucleates, there is a heat that is evolved. So the moment the heat is evolved, then now the cooling medium, whatever is this mold that you are using, has to extract that heat also. So because of that excess heat, the cooling rate suddenly comes down. So this slope is nothing but the cooling rate, and you will see that cooling rate comes down. So as a result, if this is the cooling rate for a pure liquid, as it is cooled at T to the power 4 cooling rate according to the Newton's law, and whereas this will have a lower cooling rate than this, and as a result the slope decreases. And once you come to the solid, again you will have another slope based on whatever is the temperature. Again this also will follow T to the power 4. Until the whole solidification is complete, this will follow a particular slope, and the moment the solidification is complete, it goes in, there will be another further slope change from this to this. And from the slope change that is happened from this to this, you will be able to recognize that there is another thermal arrest. So there are two thermal arrests here. One is called liquidus, another is called solidus. And now if I do it for various alloys, you will be able to, for each alloy, you are able to generate these 2 points. And if I join all these points, I am able to get the liquidus and I am able to get the solidus. So this is how we can get the whole information about the phase diagram by simply using a thermal analysis. So thermal analysis is very useful to understand such phase diagrams, but there are limitations. What are the limitations? Because here, if you use a thermal analysis, the thermal analysis is able to give you this particular slope change only when there is a significant amount of enthalpy difference between the two phases that are involved. Liquid to solid, there is a significant enthalpy change. But if there is a solid to solid transformation, for example, I have a phase diagram of, let's say, aluminum copper. This is aluminum copper phase diagram with a Al to Cu here, theta, and this is what we call it as a solvus line. So getting this particular liquidus and getting this solidus is not very difficult from using this kind of a cooling curve analysis. But getting this particular solvus line is not so easy, because when at this solvus line, what is happening? The alpha is precipitating the theta if I am cooling this alloy. So if I take this alloy, for example, and allow this alloy to solidify, the way I get a cooling curve will be in principle something like this exactly. because this is the liquidus, this is the solidus. I should be able to get this. But as I cool this solid further, this solid at this temperature should show me further slope change, because this is precipitating theta, and theta may have a different enthalpy when compared to the alpha, and there should be some delta H difference between the alpha and theta, and this delta H difference between alpha and theta should cause some kind of a slope change here. But the problem is that this delta H difference in the solid state between any two solids is not as large as the delta H difference between a liquid and solid, because liquid and solid there is a significant difference in terms of the structure. Liquid is random arrangement of atoms, whereas a solid is having a crystalline arrangement of atoms. So there is a significant delta H difference, which is usually of the order of certain kilojoules. Most of the time delta H of fusion is of the order of few kilojoules, whereas delta H of transformation from, let's say, alpha to theta is only a few joules, maybe few hundreds of joules, and as a result such kind of transformations do not bring a slope changes here, and that slope change may be so small for your thermocouple to be able to detect. Sometimes what we also do is to make this more sensitive. Instead of just plotting the temperature versus time, we take the slope of this as a function of time. So basically dt by dt as a function of time, and when you plot the dt by dt as a function of time, you will see, for example, if this slope is constant, then you would see a constant here. I mean, I'm saying it as constant, but actually it is not constant, it is t to the power 4. For the sake of understanding, let us understand. So here suddenly there is a slope change, so you will see a sudden step. Instead of simply a slope change, you see a step now. And again here for some period it will be constant, again you will see a sudden step. So you will be able to see a sudden step when you are plotting dt by dt, d capital T by d small t, where capital T being temperature, small t being time, and as a function of small t here, time. If you do this, you will be able to see this, and this kind of things can be able to be felt much more easily, the transformations. And if there is a further solid state transformation, you should have seen another small step, either decrease or increase depending on whether the enthalpy change between this to this is lower, or if there is a what is called either a heat evolution or heat absorption. Depending on that, you may have either a step here down here or a step up here, one of the two. So but then thing is, because this delta H difference being so small, we usually do not see much difference. And to understand these kind of differences, we do not use a normal cooling curve technique, but a special technique called differential thermal analysis. And that is where a special technique has been evolved, which is called DTA, for understanding particularly the transformations that are happening more in the solid states than the liquid states. So there are two techniques, thermal analysis techniques, which are used in general. One is called DTA, another is called DSC. One is called differential thermal analysis, another is called differential scanning calorimeter. And as you can easily see the difference, one uses thermal analysis, which is basically temperature measurements. Another is a calorimeter, so you measure the enthalpy differences. So what we do in this is, you have two sample holders, where you put one reference sample and where another holder you put your sample, and keep on heating both these at a particular heating rate, a certain dH by dt. And you make sure that your reference sample is such that in the temperature domain of your interest, this reference sample does not undergo any phase transformation. For example, if I am interested to find out, let's say in case of my alloy, let's say pure aluminum, I want to find out the melting point of aluminum, which I know is 660 degrees centigrade. I can use a reference which is, let's say, nickel or some alumina powder. knowing pretty well that up to 660 nothing happens in alumina powder or a nickel, because nickel is pure metal and it's an FCC. Up to the melting point it is FCC, and accepting one difference that happens over a function of time, temperature, that is nothing but the Cp is changing as a function of temperature. Other than that, you see that there is no other phase transformations in this material. Up to the melting point it is only FCC, and this melting point is about 1450 for nickel. So if I use such a reference and put my sample and try to see what is the difference in the temperature between these two, and plot the delta T as a function of time or as a function of temperature. Time and temperature are interchangeable because I am heating at a particular heating rate. My heating rate is fixed. So as a result, temperature and time are fixed. So if my heating rate is certain delta T by delta T, so that means certain Kelvin per second or minute. Usually most of these experiments are done in the range of around 5 degree Kelvin per minute to about 100 degree Kelvin per minute. This is the range in most of these machines operate at. So if you are heating at a particular rate, certain degrees per minute, so this can be plotted as temperature. And you see that suddenly as you start heating up to about 660, you will see that the temperature difference between these two is very small when you are heating it. Of course, there will be a small difference because the heat capacity of this is different from the heat capacity of this. This is aluminum sample, this is nickel sample. So there will be a small difference in the heat capacity, because of which there will be a small temperature difference, because the rate at which this nickel gets heated up, the rate at which aluminum gets heated up will be different because of the heat capacity differences. So in principle, this will not be actually flat, the delta T will not be 0, but it will possibly be increasing linearly or decreasing linearly depending on whatever is the difference. So if I assume that it is increasing linearly, and suddenly we will see at the melting point there will be because when a solid melts it absorbs heat, so you will see suddenly a peak, and this peak gives you an indication that this is the melting point. We will stop here